The VA did a sneaky change to the M21 TAC 1, and we know that these changes came straight from the OIG report about fraudulent DBQs that came out January 4th of this year, 2024. Language has changed to be more clear when the VA is processing private DBQs, and that's what we're going to look at today. Now, this change to the M21 is pretty big. We're not going to read the whole thing. You can see here it's updated June 24th. 2024, and then scroll down a little bit, you'll see the change date. Now, what I'm going to do is I've already word searched the word private, but before we get into that, I want to scroll down to this here. If the DBQ or exam is report by, then the certification and signature. So this is just how a private provider of that DBQ should sign the DBQ. And this is very specific. All right. So if you have all the evidence, you do everything you need to do, and your DBQ provider does not sign as appropriate, that's a big deal. The VA is really looking at fraudulent DBQs and the alteration of DBQs. I'm not going to explain that here. I just did a video on that. I'm going to leave it below in the pinned comments if you want to talk about the alteration of DBQs. Now, let's go ahead and here we go. When a privately completed DBQ is deemed insufficient for rating purposes and a VA exam is requested as a result, claims processors must add a permanent VBMS note explaining the reason for finding the privately DBQ insufficient. So if you think your DBQ was deemed insufficient, you should have a note in your VBMS. Your VSO can see that. Your C file would be able to see that and make that determination as if you're wondering, hey, was my DBQ insufficient or not? Now, a lot of times, and I don't know, well, I know why, because the VA doesn't do their jobs. Veterans will submit private IMOs and private DBQs, and they're not even looked at for that claim. That would absolutely be a higher level review. Not necessarily they looked at the DBQ and found that to be insufficient. But scrolling down, we're going to keep on looking for the word private here. Claims processors may not dismiss. Claims processors may not dismiss a privately completed DBQ without a justifiable and documented reason. This is good. If a claims processor determines that a privately completed DBQ is potentially inauthentic, any VA exam is needed, then the claims processor must add a permanent note. There we go. We got that. Okay. Scrolling down to more. This is probably the biggest thing to look at when it comes to this part of the M21 TAC 1. When privately completed DBQs should generally be accepted at face value, as discussed, there we go. There may be factors that warrant closer scrutiny to assess the authenticity of the information provided. Now, this one we are going to read because it's really getting at those fraudulent DBQs. Indicators of potential inauthenticity include, but are not limited to, the following. So here are the indicators. The non-VA provider identified on the DBQ has contact information that is unverifiable or contains discrepancies, or is located an unreasonable distance, generally more than 100 miles, from the veteran's place of residence, yet the provider reported regularly seeing the veteran as a patient and or that the exam was completed in person. So it's not that your DBQs can't be, one, if you're looking at DBQs, you really want those to be in person via telehealth. Telehealth is an option for a lot of conditions. It's not an option for a lot more conditions. And if your DBQ provider is saying that, hey, I do see this veteran regularly and they don't, that's not good. Okay. Some would even call that fraud. So that's what that's getting at. It's not saying that you can't have a DBQ completed more than 100 miles away, but there's a little checkbox on the DBQ that talks about, was this done in person? Was it done via telehealth? What does that look like? And you want to make sure the DBQ provider answers that truthfully. The privately completed DBQ contains, this is another indicator, information that conflicts with the overall evidentiary record. So going against evidence, which would be really weird. particularly concerning details that impact the outcome of the claim. Obviously, that's a big deal. Signs of improper alteration, and here we go back to this fraud thing. For example, inconsistent appearance of text and formatting, such as the examiner certification and signature section being visually different than other sections of the DBQ. Look, listen, when it comes to the alteration of the DBQs, and that's really the fraud I'm getting at here, it's not that hard to edit a PDF, copy paste some things, and put it where it needs to be. That's a really big deal. VA determines the privately completed DBQ insufficient for rating purposes and orders an examination, but the veteran refuses to report for the exam. So that's 3 indicators. We have the location, we have the alteration, and then we have the refusing the CMP exam. Now, there's an important note down here. The presence of one or more of these potential indicators of inauthenticity does not automatically mean the privately completed DBQ is inauthentic. Oh my goodness, or fraudulent. That one got me. Okay, so having one or more of these indicators doesn't mean that it's fraud. It's just saying the VA is looking for fraud and they're going to be using these indicators. However, the presence of one or more of these indicators may call into question the information provided and may warrant additional development as discussed, and that's developing a claim, referral for possible fraud review. This is necessarily a case-by-case determination. That is absolutely crucial, okay? Fraudulent DBQs are a real thing. Do not dismiss them like they are. They're not. A privately completed DBQ should not be routinely rejected or automatically deemed potentially inauthentic or fraudulently solely because it supports entitlement to a maximum scheduler. All right. Notes. Claims processors may have a duty to evaluate and weigh all evidence of record, including private DBQs. If it's determined that a private DBQ contains indicators of inauthenticity that are substantive enough to deem it potentially inauthentic or fraudulent, claims processors have the authority to assign low or probative value to the privately completed DBQ. All right. The takeaway there is the claims processors have the authority to assign low or no probative value to the private DBQ. If a private completed DBQ is erroneously deemed insufficient and the veteran fails to report to the exam that was requested, then privately DBQ should not be assigned lower probative value. There we go. Boom. And that's really all I have to show you on these changes for M21. I love seeing OIG reports make recommended changes, and then we see those changes in the M21 TAC 1. My issue here, and to be honest with you, I don't know. These are just my thoughts. I think going after fraud could have a very negative effect on all the veterans not committing fraud at all. And whenever I say fraud, and I'm not gonna explain it here. The video is gonna be below in the pinned comments. But really, the OIG report hints at other entities, outside entities, so not private DBQ people, not Nexus letter providers. However, it goes from Nexus letter DBQ to an entity prior to going to the veteran, or it goes straight from the entity being uploaded to the VA. And when it's in that third-party space, that's when there's potential for alteration, as reported by the VA, not by me. Listen, private Nexus letters, private DBQs are not a problem at all. They are very strong evidence. I'm a fan. A lot of VSOs are a fan of private Nexus letters, private DBQs when they are needed. Most of the times they're not needed at all. I'm a big fan of going for or using IMOs and DBQs in appeals. Can you use it for initial claims? You absolutely can. It's just not my recommendation because your evidence should get you there anyways. However, there's a roadblock over here called a CMP exam, and that's a whole other topic for a whole other video. But these are your changes to the M21 TAC 1 when it comes to private DBQs.